ציפי לבני,
באמת.
היום היא דיברה כל כך יפה.
C, D, E, F. Okay. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to start in just a few seconds. We've been waiting for the live view. It's going to be broadcasted on the internet, so we're waiting for an okay for us to start, and then we'll begin this panel. So if you could please sit down and get your seats. We're about to begin. מה אצלך?
עושים את זה מאחור. שומעים אותך?
אותי שומעים, זהו. I'll talk. Do we have a go? Can we start? Okay, I think we're going to start. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this panel. My name is Tamika Klein. I'm a journalist in Israel. I live in Yerushalayim. I have 3 very little kids, and they're very cute. And my wife is trying to take care of them now when they're trying to maybe sleep a little bit. I write for Makor Rishon newspaper. It's a weekly newspaper in Israel. And I've been writing for the past almost 10 years on Jewish diaspora affairs, and I want to introduce our amazing panel here. It's going to be very interesting. On my left is Ruth Calderon.
I have 3 children, but they are more mature.
Who says they're more mature?
I mean, they are older in years.
Oh, they're exactly, okay. Okay, so you are a visiting professor in Talmudic civil law in Harvard Law School, former member of Knesset, of the Yesh Atid party, and deputy speaker of the Knesset, an educator and academic Talmud scholar. You could clap your hands for her. We have Kenneth Bob. He serves as the president of Amenu. You saw their stand there in the tent, a progressive Zionist organization and a chair of a project, Rosanna USA. He's a member of the Jewish Agency for Israel Board of Governors and sits in its executive committee, and many other progressive Jewish organizations. And then
I also have 3 children.
And you have 3? Oh, wow. Listen, statistics over here are very very good. Are they mature?
Well, 2 live in Israel, so that's a good decision.
Okay.
And, one's in Brooklyn.
Okay.
I'm sorry, mature in Hebrew, מבוגרים, I didn't mean
הכל בסדר.
internally.
We have 3 kids up until the age of 3, so.
So yeah, they are older.
Right, it's a little different. Okay, and then on my far left.
Yeah. Well done.
Okay. We have Yossi Klein Halevi. We are not related, I don't think. We'll have to look into that. A senior fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, and he co-directs the Institute's Muslim Leadership Initiative, an author, and I'm sure many of you have either read his book or should read his book. So, which one? That's Yossi. So this, you could clap your hands for him too. Okay. This panel, unfortunately, we started a little bit late because of lunch, our kosher lunch that was stolen and brought back. And we're going to talk about, this whole conference is talking about Jewish diaspora relations, Israel-Jewish diaspora relations, and this one is specific on the niche of immigrants, of the wandering Jew. And it's interesting because this morning, I came in direct from Tel Aviv airport, and I'm going away very soon, and I slept great on the flight. Anyways, I have an American passport. I was born in America but grew up in Israel. So Yossi was saying I'm like his kids because I grew up in Israel as an Israeli, but my parents were American, and they took my passport and they said welcome home. And I was like, okay, I don't feel it's my home. I do feel connected to the country. But I think that's something that all of us kind of went through. And we had an email introduction to this panel, and all 3 of them are really, were immigrants at a certain point of their life. And Ruth is now an immigrant in a way, right? Like living in the U.S. without being,
I have a
temporary.
great immigration story, but
Oh, yeah.
you'll tell me when.
Okay. Now.
Okay?
Yeah.
So once it's very hard as an Israeli to come into the States, the immigration is very scary. And sometimes I think I'll just leave my luggage, I'm going home. So one time I came in and there was this big man and he looks at my passport and I'm always afraid if I'm answering the right answer. And he says, "Where are your parents from?" And I'm like, "What happened? Now that there's a new president, they start asking about parents." And I said, "My father is from Bulgaria, my mom from Germany." He said, "No, so where did he get to Bulgaria from?" And I'm like, "What's going on here?" He said, "From Spain to Bulgaria." So I look up and he has a badge here and it says Calderon.
Yeah.
So he wanted to say welcome home.
Wow. Good story.
He was not Jewish.
Oh, well.
We don't know that.
So I want to kind of, we're going to learn from the plenary, and we're going to have shorter answers. And this is a positive, and I want each and every one of you to give a short anecdote of the sense of feeling as an immigrant. You know, you made Aliyah, both of you made Aliyah. Ruth lived in the U.S. for periods of time throughout her life. So maybe we'll start with you. You made Aliyah, lived in a kibbutz, right? How was that like?
Well, so first of all, I have to just mention this is a homecoming for me because I lived in this area, and if I tell people in the audience here, some of the panelists will not get this, but if you've had any contact with Kolamet, Eitz Chaim, Bob and Bob, or the Jewish Learning Works, then you know my family. And I'm sure that covers almost everybody here. So for me, this is really a homecoming to be here in Palo Alto. And actually, I made Aliyah in 1976 following a Aliyah party in my mother's and father's backyard in Los Altos. And there's actually people here who I think were at that party, if they remember. And so I made Aliyah to kibbutz. And it was a particularly interesting experience because we were an American garin made up of both people from the youth movement of Habonim, Dror, the labor Zionist youth movement, and people we had met in the Jewish student campus milieu of the late 60s, early 70s. So it was a very leftist, ideological group. And Kibbutz Gezer is in the center of the country near Ramla, but had fallen apart several times due to social issues. And so basically they handed it over to us starting in 1974. I went in 76 to reestablish it. And for many, many years, it was known as the American kibbutz.
Right, they even have a baseball team.
I'm going to get there.
Right.
And so, and we had numbers of claim to fame that just reinforced the issue of being Americans. We helped start baseball in Israel. Mm-hmm. I think some of you probably know that Israel's going to have an Olympic team in Tokyo in the next Olympics in baseball, which a lot of people can't figure out.
It's not very Israeli, though.
And we...
They're not from Gezer.
You said short answers.
Okay.
Another thing that we did, being American Jews in the mid-1970s, is that we wanted to have a kosher kitchen on the kibbutz.
Wow.
And back then, this is the 70s in Israel, no one quite understood if you weren't Orthodox why you'd want to have a kosher kitchen. And we said, well, that's how many of us grew up, and we wanted to be welcoming, we wanted everyone to be able to come visit. And so we actually had a kosher kitchen, mm-hmm. and it was very hard for people to understand because we didn't have a mashgiach in our kosher kitchen. We kept it kosher. And neighbors would say, we don't understand, what is this animal? So we kept sort of sticking out, and I had this really throughout my time being involved with the kibbutz, and I was also very much representing the kibbutz on the outside. I was treasurer of the kibbutz, and we set up a factory, and I was manager of the factory. I was involved in Israeli politics, the founding of Peace Now, and it was always, but you're an American. Matter of fact, one of the funny things, and I'm sure other people here have had this experience, they would call us Anglo-Saxons. And I said...
Anglo-Saxon.
Anglo-Saxon. And I could never quite understand. I think I have no Anglo-Saxon roots at all. Right. So there is this identity, and so I always had that. So the last story I'll tell, because my name is Ken Bob, and people always ask, where'd that last name come from?
Right.
And we had stories in our family, not important. And once I was representing the kibbutz, I was the treasurer, and I went to the Rehovot customs house, because back then new immigrants got all kinds of rights, and we could get discounts on refrigerators for our rooms and fans and all kinds of electrical stuff. So I go every time with everyone's Ole booklets, Tudat Ole, to get them stamped by the meches. And the guy looked at mine and said, "Oh, Bub." He was Russian. And I said, "You recognize my last name?" And he said, "Yes, it's Bean in Russian." I said, when I go to the Shuk in Ramla next week, I'll bring one back and show you. And so I needed a Russian meches officer, to tell me about what my name meant. And that was, I think, an immigrant story.
Okay.
That's right.
By the way, before we get to Yossi, there's one thing you said that was interesting about the kosher kitchen. Is that a difference between like a liberal American Jew to a liberal Israeli Jew?
Well, no, obviously that's a really important question in the time that we live in now. Back in the 70s, there really wasn't a lot in between in Israel. Obviously, Israel has changed thanks to people like Ruth and Binan, other institutions that have brought out other ways of expressing the Judaism. Of course, the Reform and Conservative movement now have real footholds in Israel. I'll just finish the story. I now have a home in Yafo as well as in New York. An old friend of mine says there is no galut if you commute. And now that I have a home in each country, it makes it a lot easier. And so we ended up in Israel for Yom Kippur this year, and we're looking where we're going to go for Yom Kippur. And next door neighbors, old dear friends of mine, also from my days at Berkeley, said, "Well, we go to this Reform congregation in Yafo." And we went to a Reform service that was completely in Hebrew, Tzabarim. A lot of people talk about, well, the Reform and Conservative movements are imports into Israel.
American, right.
But actually, this was a completely in Hebrew service, a Reform service. And so
Okay.
I think, times have changed.
Okay, Yossi.
Yeah, well, I made Aliyah in the summer of 1982, which was a very loaded time to make Aliyah. It was
Wow.
the beginning of the First Lebanon War, and nobody was making Aliyah from anywhere then. And I get to the airport, and they send me to this room, and I'm waiting for hours for somebody to show up. And finally, hours later, someone from the Jewish agency shows up. And he's completely disinterested in my presence. He doesn't look me in the eye once. He sits there, he's asking me all these questions, he's filling out a form. And then he comes to the question, father's name. I said, Zoltan. Suddenly he looks up at me and smiles. Hungarian. And that's when I understood that being a Jew returning to Israel is not quite enough. And that it's going to be something completely different from what I expected. I made Aliyah in a very strange way. I came with my then girlfriend and since my wife of 35, 36 years, Sarah. And, well, listen to the story. Sarah is actually one of the very few immigrants to Israel who genuinely is Anglo-Saxon. She is a Mayflower descendant. And when I made Aliyah, she had not yet converted. And she came as my girlfriend. And she said, I'll come for a year. We were both young writers. She said, it'll be fun. I'll write in Jerusalem, and then we'll see what happens. And we both knew that something had to happen. And it did. She converted that year. We married. We came back to the States. And so the story I want to tell you is about being an American Jew and an Israeli is really about Sarah. Because we went to synagogue shortly before our wedding. And somebody comes over to her, a woman afterwards, and says, I can't stop staring at you. You look just like a little shiksa. And Sarah, I have to tell you, Sarah was mortified. I think she would handle it better today. And afterwards she said, no one in Israel has ever noticed that I don't look Jewish. And by ethnic Ashkenazi American standards, she does not look Jewish. And no one in Israel knows that for a very simple reason. There's no such thing as looking Jewish in Israel. And experiencing Aliyah through Sarah's eyes really helped me appreciate what we have. So when we talk about the lack of religious pluralism, for example, which pains me deeply as someone who sits at the Hartman Institute, as some of you know, that's one of our flagship issues. Nevertheless, we do have a very profound form of Jewish pluralism, and that's ethnic pluralism. And the fact that Sarah looks as Jewish as anyone else in Israel, including our neighbors who knew us for years and never thought to ask, you don't look Jewish. The only time she's ever experienced that sense of otherness has been here. And Sarah has never actually experienced being an American Jew. We moved to Israel, we've lived there ever since, and she comes back for visits, but she comes back very much as a visiting expat. So our experience, I think it says something really essential about Israel.
Okay. Ruth?
What a lovely session. I enjoy myself.
We can stay here longer if you want. We'll cancel the next.
I don't know which story to pick. I just want to say that I'm very Israeli. You can hear it. And yet I feel more Jewish than Israeli. That is really what I am. And I feel that if I would have to stay here or in any place in the world with the Jewish community, I'm naturally blending in. And so that feeling of here and there is something I cherish and I love in this culture of ours. And the fact that wherever you get in the world, in Peru, in Australia, if you come to Friday night, they will immediately be your family and take you home, and you feel the same to them. But still, the Israeli eyes coming here. I spent a year in Australia when I was a teenager, then a year in Savannah, Georgia, with my father as a sabbatical. He was specializing in storage of silos, so there's, I think it is cotton there. So we spent time there, then 3 years in New Jersey, and now I'm in Boston. I think when I really started understanding the differences is when I was a mother in this country, an Israeli mother to 3 young kids in New Jersey. And so everything is so different. But the first thing is that you're supposed to come to play dates. Like, what is it my business if she's going to play with a girl? Why do you want me there? What am I going to do for all the time that they play? Like this difference between Israel, where kids come in and out of the house, and at the end of the evening, someone calls you and says they are ready, they ate, I showered them, you can take them home. To hear that they will say, on the 25th, we're going to play for 2 hours together. And you're supposed to come also. I was like, it took me a while to get that. And Bichlal, we got to New Jersey, to Livingston, New Jersey, also known as Livingston. Everyone was Jewish, but we came out of the car from the airport. The kids went out, all these lawns that are perfect and manicured, and they looked for a few minutes and they said, Ima, no one lives here. No kids in the street. Nobody plays. Like, what are we supposed to do here with all this lawn and...
They were all on play dates at the moment.
So then I saw that every house has their own nedot in the backyard.
Swings.
But what do you do with swings if you don't have kids that are just there when you go out? So that was a lot to kind of learn. And one day, my central girl, Naomi, she went to school. She had no English at all. She was, I think, 4th grade in elementary school. And after, like, I don't know, 2 months, she came back and she said, today, Mrs. Thor told all the kids to applaud me. And I was like, what? How come? She doesn't even speak English. So, well, and she said, because I lost my accent.
Wow.
And I was like, no, Mickey, you didn't lose your accent. You changed your Israeli accent to an American accent. It's an accent. But I understood very quickly how America is very welcoming, but very quickly making you one of us, and you have to speak our language. So that was part of it. Then kindergarten for little kids, Shaul, my youngest, there was something that I don't know if I can talk about it clearly enough, but I felt a very big difference to raising young kids, something to do with discipline and with not being too creative, not running, not wearing things that I felt this is the moment where good citizens that will stand backwards when the subway is open. That's how you make them, but there's a price to it. And I was like a bit worried, and that was one thing. This same Naomi, when it was Christmas time, it's a shock. Like, we are now a minority culture, and everyone is doing all this thing, and they're little kids. So we went to the mall one day, and there was this avenue of Christmas trees, and they're all lit up. And she was in the age of everything glittery, and she wanted everything pink. And so I'm seeing all of this, and I'm like, And we didn't want Jewish school because I couldn't live with compulsory prayers. So they went to public school, which was Jewish anyway in Livingston. But so I see all these Christmas trees, and I'm like worried, and I'm saying, Nawiki, does this attract you? Does it tempt you? And she said, Ima, it's beautiful, but it's like men's fashion. It's not for me. I was really relieved.
It's a good.
And
okay.
then I wrote an ABC of American Israeli. But one thing that I really noticed is a kind of patriotism of flags. Like flags in America, first of all, they're huge.
Right.
In Israel, it's like not good taste. I'm very much a flag person. I'm national. My father was from Beitar. But these huge flags, I didn't know what to make of them. And then seeing people wearing bathing suits, bikini, in the American flag. And I thought if someone in Israel would dare to wear a bikini of the Israeli flag, they would kill him. It's not just they would take him to jail. They would just kill him.
Drown him.
So I'll stop for now, but I have a million.
Yeah. I have one question to ask you. At the beginning of your words, you spoke about the fact that you feel more Jewish than Israeli. Do you feel that most Israelis feel the same way?
I think it depends on their parents. When I was growing up, it was a big deal to say we Israelis. There was even a seminar in high school where we had to choose. There were 3 signs. I think Abelitz did it, or Gesher. Jew, Yehudi, Israeli, Adam, human being, or Israeli or Jewish. What do you feel that you're more? And I was really frustrated with this choice, and I stood with Jewish, and I think most of the kids stood as Israelis. It has to do with the fact that my parents were a little older, and they were immigrants, and I felt, although it wasn't said in so many words, that this is the most important thing in who we are. And until today, even people in the party that I'm part of have this ambivalence about Jews not living in Israel, and I don't.
Yair Lapid, for instance.
Yair Lapid has a big issue with, and that issue comes not from looking down on Jews not in Israel, but from the fear that everybody is going. You know, when you come to a small group or you teach a small class and there's like 7 people and one goes to the bathroom, and you want to kill them.
Right.
Because you feel so I think Israel in the beginning had the feeling that everyone, in the beginning you couldn't leave, but when you could leave, everyone will leave. So there was a lot of judgment of coming out of fear. And I think Yair from Tommy is still not
His father,
so,
yeah.
But it's getting there.
So I could tell you, I interviewed Yair Lapid this year, and he mentioned both Israelis moving, leaving Israel and moving to the U.S. or other countries. So it was, called Yerida, someone going down. And today it's like a lot of people.
Said that?
So a lot of people, it's like considered derogatory. So I don't know if he would use the word, but it said it makes him mad that Israelis are going to live in the U.S., which is interesting. And the second thing he said was you could only really fulfill your Jewish values fully in Israel, which I think was interesting from a guy, in a center, Israeli party, non-religious. Necessarily very Jewish, right? Definitely. So as someone who was a son of Olim, we made Aliyah when I was 2. I don't remember too much. Everybody says I yelled on the plane for 10 hours, but that's about it. But I have twin nephews who go to like a very elitist religious Zionist school, and they're talking amongst themselves about a relative of theirs who was marrying someone who wasn't Jewish. And they said to each other, so what's the problem? So, she could convert, just like Tamika did. And I said, wait, why do you think I converted? And look, I look like a Jew, no offense. I look like a Jew, okay? And my father once told me you could wear a hat instead of a kippah, but they're going to know you're Jewish. Anyways, they said, well, you moved from, you made Aliyah from America, and then you must have converted because there are no Jews outside of Israel. And they're little kids, but still, it was like an innocent way of seeing these things, and it definitely kind of puts a spotlight on what people think. And then now I'm that annoying uncle that gives them lectures about Jews around the world and stuff like that. So they don't like me as much anymore. But what are you going to do? So I wanted to ask you, each one of you. We'll start with you, Ken. About do these people who were immigrants or are immigrants, do they have more of? Is it their role to make these connections? I could tell you, for instance, I've been to the IAC conference a few times, the Israel American Council, which is basically like the umbrella organization in the U.S. for Israelis who moved to the U.S. It's a very up-and-coming organization, and they say that they want to bridge the gap between U.S. Jews and Israel. I mean, I don't personally think they're going to be able to, but do you think that these types of organizations or individuals are the ones who could do this?
In terms of bridging
the gap between Israel, Jews in Israel, and Jews in the U.S.
Look, I think actually it's all our role. I don't think any organization can claim it's their job. I think the question is if the IAC is saying it's their role, they obviously are viewing themselves as Israelis who live here, and they can play that bridge. And I think that's reasonable on some level. They should make an attempt at it. But I really think actually it's really all of our role to work on this. Look, it's interesting in the plenum. Someone asked for all the Israelis to raise their hands. I raised my hand. Now, most people would say, well, you're not really an Israeli. And I'm saying, excuse me. I have an Israeli identity card. Children were born in Israel, served in the Israeli army. Now I have an apartment there, but that's not the point. The point is that I identify both as an Israeli as an American Jew. So in some ways, I find it very useful in dealing with this issue. I was telling someone previously that I love the Hebrew language, and whenever I'm with an Israeli, I speak to them in Hebrew as a matter of principle. I will tell a story that happened, which excuse the political nature of it, but I was speaking at a conference in Toronto on Sunday. J-Space Canada it was called, and the JDL, which I didn't even know existed anymore, Yossi, by the way, but it does evidently.
In Canada.
At least in Toronto it does.
Yeah.
And they came and disturbed the conference.
I get their emails.
Yes, they disturbed the conference, called us all kinds of terrible names. And I had to go back to the airport, and a very close friend of mine, a Bedouin woman who is now in Montreal, was speaking at the conference as well, and we decided to take a lift together to the airport to catch up on the way. And as we walked out of the hotel, the JDLers were still demonstrating, and I was speaking to Amal in Hebrew, because that's the language that we speak in. And they started yelling at us, leftist traitors. Well, Amal thought this was pretty funny. She's a Bedouin, Palestinian, Israeli citizen being called a leftist traitor talking to her Jewish friend in Hebrew. And so, so it's these identities, the identities are in some ways are very interesting. To hear Ruth talk about how she identifies first as a Jew, and most Israelis, especially young Israelis I know, probably wouldn't answer the question that way. So I think there's a lot of bridging that needs to be done. This is why this whole notion of this conference, I think, is so valuable, because I think we have to break out of some of these old models. I'll give you one other example. In the bio, you mentioned that I'm the executive of the Jewish Agency, which is an interesting place to function in this world. Just did a whole new strategic plan that addresses some of these issues under the leadership of Yitzhak Bougie Herzog, and I think it's actually an exciting time to try to deal with this. So probably many of you know that the Jewish Agency has lots of shlichim, emissaries, in North America. Summer camps, communities, educators, all kinds, right? One thing that we've discovered at the Jewish Agency is one of the best bridges to connect the American Jewish community to Israel is the shlichim when they go home. They've now lived in North America for 2-3 years. They now have experienced a lot of different things Jewishly. Tzippi talked about walking to a synagogue and walking in and sitting with her husband, and most of the Israelis had never seen that. And all of a sudden here they're living in liberal Jewish communities where this is happening. And so we're now trying at the Jewish Agency to figure out how we harness those shlichim.
71 years late.
Well,
maybe.
You know what? I didn't have David Ben-Gurion's ear when he was chair of the Jewish Agency.
Okay, well.
So I just give that as an example. There's a couple of models here where I think that we can leverage existing things we already do to help build these bridges better.
Okay, Yossi.
Yeah, the group that I feel in some way culturally closest to within world Jewry outside of Israel are Israeli Americans. And the reason for that is because we actually speak the same language. I mean, literally the same language. And we speak that same language to our kids, which is, I call it the new Yiddish or the new Ladino, which is the meeting point of the two great Jewish languages of our time, which is Hebrew and English. And the two groups that speak, though, that are initiates into this new Yiddish or Ladino,
We call it Hebrish.
Hebrew are exactly, which is, I'm sure, the language you grew up in. And that is Israeli Americans and American Israelis. And so there's really something, I think there's a missing bridge. Now, I don't know if these two groups have the cultural power or authority to ripple beyond ourselves, but we're the ones who really know these two centers of Jewish life. And I think it's time to begin that conversation. I also think that it's a sign of the maturation of Israeli society that someone like me would feel closest to Israelis who left and moved to the place that I chose to live. And that really is an indication that those days that you were talking about, Ruth, are over. And thank God they're over. You know, we don't have to count
There are enough traffic jams as they are.
Yeah, really.
Everyone will come.
No, and the moment,
the
the breakthrough moment for Israeli society was the 90s, with first the Ethiopians and then the Russians. Israelis didn't really say we have too many immigrants. You didn't quite hear that. Maybe you did. But certainly that's when I think we as a society lost our numbers angst. And we began to relax. You know, we've now fortunately moved from the number 6 million Israeli Jews to 7 million. And I felt that was a big emotional milestone, where we don't have to keep talking about 6 million Israeli Jews anymore. And so we're 7 million, and that too is an indication of relaxing into the demographic reality that we've managed to achieve. And we're very close to being, we are now the largest, as far as I know, the largest Jewish community in the world. We're very close to having an absolute majority of the world's Jews soon. So in that sense, I think it can help us navigate the transition from an outmoded ideological negation of world Jewry, and this notion of galut, which is really a term that I almost never hear anymore in Israel. You know who uses it? Religious Zionists use it. That's where you'll
In my newspaper on this Friday. I don't know if you saw it.
So, but that's who will use it. It comes from the religious Zionist community, but outside of that world, you don't hear about galut. You don't even hear Yordim anymore. It's really emigres. It's mehagerim, which is a much healthier.
It's actually relocation.
Relocation.
Definitely here in Palo Alto, right?
So it's a much healthier way of looking at it. And in that sense, you know, I think that one of the great achievements of Zionism, of the Jewish people, is that the galut is over. And the galut is over because the overwhelming majority of Jews, maybe outside of Iran, which is 10,000 Jews, the world Jewry lives either in the state of Israel or in the condition of voluntary separation from the land of Israel, which is a condition of diaspora and not galut. So galut is over. And galut ended in 1989 with the fall of the Iron Curtain. That was the end of galut. And so we're living in this extraordinary moment that I think we should be celebrating and not agonizing over.
Wow, that's very interesting, and I want to definitely. But I want to. There's specifically, you mentioned you feel closest to, I guess, American Jews living in Israel and Israeli Jews living in the U.S.
I didn't say the first, I said the second.
Okay. Oh, you don't?
Yes, let's say.
No, you said both. You said the two groups.
Yeah.
You said the
Those are
two groups.
that I feel
Right. So
have
it's so it's interesting again. So as a son to American Olim in Israel, when my father would speak about people who left the country and lived there, it would be like those Israelis who who go and live in New York, and then I don't know they trick the people there, and when they put their air conditioning in, like they charge more than they should and stuff like that. And these are things you hear as a kid growing up. And also, again, as someone who has been, again, I've been to the IC a few times in the past few years. It's interesting, like their evolution from being Israelis to then understanding, wait, we cannot just be and Israelis in the U.S. because it's just like saying, as someone who grew up in Israel, that I'm an American, and when I come to America, welcome home. No, it's not my home. I may sound a little American, but at the end of the day, I'm Israeli. And when kids of immigrants, when they move somewhere, they're not going to keep on taking that identity a little bit, but they want to move on. So now they're understanding their whole Jewish aspect, right, of living here. But I'm wondering what your relationship is with these Israelis who moved overseas, because it's a very different type of community.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it really begins linguistically, and
Because you speak English, so what's the difference between you and American Jews?
Because the Hebrew and English really have merged for me. When certainly, when I would talk with my kids, I'm mitlabeting, and it's a whole new syntax, and that's really in some ways a metaphor for a deeper process of two groups that do feel to some extent at home in both places. So I wouldn't negate the at-homeness of either group in the place that they left. There still is a deep connection. And when I go speak on campuses here, the kids who move me most, and the kids who are most strongly for Israel, who take the greatest risks standing up for Israel on campuses, tend to be the children of Israeli Americans.
Right.
And so, and that's not even talking about those kids who go to Israel to do the army and come back. I mean, there's a very powerful movement here, and I'm really glad to see that they're organizing finally, and that they're owning this identity, because it's a terrific identity, and it's a great asset for the Jewish people.
I'll add just one sentence to that. I find it interesting. I've been back now, I lived in Israel until 1990, so I've actually lived in New York longer than I've lived anywhere. And when people ask me where I'm from, I never say New York. I live in New York. I connect I'm stronger to my time in Israel, and actually both in Minneapolis and here in Palo Alto. And I find also that although I'm very involved in American Jewish life and Jewish organizational life, that when I go to Israel as an American with some, delegation or something, I always feel a little bit uncomfortable. Like I don't really fit in with the Americans. I know much more about Israel. I speak Hebrew. I connect with people. I know my way around Israel better than most of the American Jews I go with. And I do it, and I play a role, and I can do it, but I don't feel completely comfortable anymore. Even though I've been back so long from Israel, I still feel much more connected as that Israeli-American or American-Israeli.
And yet when someone at passport control says to me, "Here, welcome home," I appreciate it, and there's a certain feeling, a response.
Well, you grew up here, so it's
different. One quick story about passport control. You've both told stories. So for a while, I was living in New York, but running an Israeli internet security company. So I was commuting back and forth all the time, and eventually I was arranging the purchase of the Israeli company by a company here in Silicon Valley, and the CTO of the company here, last name was Baruch. And I had to take him to Israel to meet our tech team. So we went through passport control, and the guy at passport control said to him, "Your last name is Baruch." And he said, "Well, it's Baruch." And what did the guy say? "Is this your first time in Israel?" And the man said, "Yes." And he said, "Why?"
I think what I'm taking out of this panel is we need to. Is my microphone working? I don't know. That we need to create a book of stories from passport control. Maybe just to conclude, I don't know if this is too big of a question, but So I mean, we mentioned, as Yossi mentioned, the fact that like the Israelis living here and the Americans living there, or these types of people are able to create that connection because they speak both of the languages. American Jews, most of them don't speak Hebrew, and then the same thing, with Israelis who more and more Israelis speak English today, but they don't speak like Jewish American, English. They don't. Again, whatever. It's not like it's not part of their lexicon or whatever. And I'm wondering what do you think can be one of these solutions to bridge that gap, to create this, even though both sides don't really have that basis.
I didn't answer the question before, and I feel it's a very difficult one because something is going on now that I'm not sure I understand completely, but I've been here for a semester, so I'm on campus and have a little more time to feel what's happening. And I feel, and excuse me if I'm completely missing it, I feel that American Jews are embarrassed by us. And they don't exactly know what to do with Israel and with what Israel does. And usually they say it's because of politics, because of the prime minister, because of politics. I don't completely buy that. I'm a centralist. I'm not in the right, not in the left. But I feel that I'm not sure why American Jews were so thrilled about us in the 6 Days War. I don't think it was our greatest time. I don't know why they didn't come before or didn't love us before, and why that was such a hit. I'm a bit embarrassed by that. I mean, the 6 Days War is not for me the highlight of Israeli life. And I don't understand why now they're so turned off. I feel the Israeli Americans get it. It's like talking about your mother when you have a partner. There are things that you can say about your mother that your partner can't, because it's, and you can't say about their mother, because it's just not, you don't get the whole picture. Now, I feel the Israelis that moved here understand the complexity, the depth, the challenge, and all the very good things. I mean, having a child son in the army now is both scary, but on the other hand, there's so much respect to the way he deals morally with what he's doing and the things he asks himself, that I look at him and I look at my students. I don't think that they, and again, as you said, the Israeli students get it, but I have law school students, divinity school students, and Middle Eastern studies, and it's very different communities. But the ones that come with the moral prophecy against Israel are so not informed, and so black and white, and so like this. I have a lot to say. There's a lot to fix in Israel, and I am trying to be part of it. But I want to say to our brothers and sisters, we are not the cousin that you're supposed to be embarrassed by. There's nothing embarrassing about Israel. It is. I'm not Yitz Greenberg, and I won't say it. I'm not old enough to say it in such pathos, but I do think it is quite a miracle. And the fact that we are stuck with occupation that I wish we will find a way to get out of is not because Israeli Jews enjoy and are racist. I mean, that's not the kids I know. That's not the people I meet. That's not most of the Israelis, for sure. And so to protect that from my students, I'm like, where do I even start? It's like saying something about your parents but you know who they are. And so something here is again, if I'll let myself like an Israeli say that, I'll say a little more. I feel that the American Jews are so asukim,
Busy with preoccupied.
with being accepted by the Americans, and in Boston it's like a waspy country, so to be accept that they, in some ways, it's something that happens to all of us, and maybe happens to Israelis with newcomers. You betray your own people in order to be accepted, and I don't like that. I'm not accepting that. We should be disputed or for everything bad that we do, and we do bad things. Of having sovereignty is a huge nisayon,
Experiment.
trial. No, nisayon like God did to Avraham. Nisayon. We are nisayon, and I'm not sure we are so great in it, and we don't have a tradition of holding power and all of that, and maybe the army is stronger than I would like. I'm not someone that thinks that Israelis, the sun comes out of
It's
the...
perfect, right.
But I feel that when they... the son of my very good friend in New York lives in... studies in Princeton, says to me that the establishment of Israel was a sin.
Wow.
And he's now a Marxist, let alone that his parents own big parts of the land. And it's an age to be Marxist. I think, the simple truth of people came as immigrants from Bulgaria or Germany. There was no option to not live, and we want to live. And I live in a shchuna. Excuse me for being long, but it's important. That was sitting on a.
I was just looking at my clock and my watch. Sorry.
On a Palestinian village that is no longer there.
Yeah,
I know that. I take responsibility on that. And if I can pay and if I can do and help people to find a good life, I'll do everything I can. But I'm not going to go away. That's not an option. And I don't feel that the American partners give a serious... I'm dealing with college students, so maybe...
Right. But what you're saying has
being
a
a bridge. What is the water under the bridge? What is the real problem? That we are embarrassing, that we have power, that having power today in our era is something that is always bad. Power is not a bad thing. Power used for bad things is bad. But I'd rather, we tried the alternative. It wasn't so great. And so I don't want to...
Okay, I'm going to stop you here, even though I want to hear a lot more of this. I do. I think it's a very, very important point. In short, like 1.5, 2 sentences, what can be the solution?
So, because I've been limited...
I want to hear you do this.
Yeah, right. Because I've been limited to a very short period, I can't
It's like
possibly...
a tweet. Think of a tweet.
So...
150 letters.
Right.
Go.
So, there's this is going to be a commercial, actually. There's a project coming up. There's something called the World Zionist Congress.
Ooh.
And it's this entity where Jews all over the world can participate in really a Jewish parliament, an international Jewish parliament.
I didn't say you could use this for your political
No.
campaign.
You'll see where I'm going with it. It makes a lot of sense.
Everyone here in the audience isn't going to vote for you. They're all on the right.
It's not an advertisement for my list. And this is an opportunity for Jews everywhere to participate in something together. And we come together next October in Jerusalem with delegations from all over the world. The Israeli delegation is actually based on the Knesset elections, and everywhere else we choose our delegates. We're going to have an election in this country, and there's Zionist lists of all stripes of religious affiliation, political. He mentioned my list. We have a Tikva slate, which is progressive Zionist. There's the ZOA on the right and everything in between. And just to answer your point, for instance, we are going to be running a Hebrew campaign.
Okay.
We want Israelis to engage around this. Israelis who live here,
so
there's a way for them to have a voice.
So the solution is voting for the World Zionist Congress? By the way,
I didn't say the solution. I said it's a tool we can use for all of us to engage together.
Okay, I'll just mention that 50,000 American Jews voted last time out of 6 million.
56,000, but okay.
Out of 6 million Jews,
right.
So something has to be...
There's still 6 million here.
Right, okay. One sentence, they're going to kill me over here. I got,
Israeli music.
Wow. You want to sing us a verse?
Do you want me to say something more about it?
No. Thank you very much.
Done.
Thank you, everybody. Oh, wait. Okay. Yeah.
The old Israeli music, the Zionist music, and the early state music was very much Israeli, and the message to diaspora Jews is keep out. This is music that belongs to us, not to you. The new Israeli music is re-Judaizing Israeli culture, and it belongs to the entire Jewish people. It's extraordinary music. Our leading rock singers are creating prayer Something is happening, and American Jews need to pay attention.
You have to learn
Thank
from
you. You're right, that's right. What? The problem is with questions that we started late. So do we have time for questions? I have a boss over here. Okay, one question. And you were very nice, so yeah.
Well, I'm not going to be so nice.
Okay.
No. But it's really important because I'm very surprised and disappointed in all these reactions here. And I love you all, actually. I know, I read your books, and, and I went to Bob and Bob all the years and everything. So I feel at home. And I'm surprised because I don't think you totally understand the Israeli-American community here in this area. It's quite different than probably in a lot of areas. One, it is much more left-oriented, okay? And there are some of the leaders, even in BDS or on the campuses in this area, that are
Israeli
Americans, okay? The other thing is, here we have, and this is interesting because I really think this area should, and I'm so glad with the Z3 and what's being done, because this area may now have as many Israeli Americans as Jewish Americans. It's a huge, huge population, okay? And about the bridging.
Wait, is there a question though? Okay.
Is there a question?
I've spoken in so many Jewish audiences the last few weeks that I
right.
didn't even notice that she wasn't
Wasn't
asking a question.
I know what you mean.
The Jewish American community, okay? And I'm surprised by that. Because I have kids who have I go to the Jewish school, they go to the Hebrew day school, they go to all those. And Israeli,
Thank you very much.
there are so many. No, it's important. You have not,
I
mean, it isn't. Anyway, they keep to themselves. Okay, they do not see the
I
importance
think we need to get.
Okay, thank you everybody. I appreciate your comment. It's very interesting, and I wish that you were up here to hear it. Thank you very much, and there are more sessions to come.
Yafé.
prominent in the research throughout is that we also are able to differentiate between how people identify themselves and what positions do they hold on issues that are considered in the realm of religion and state. So more and more and more and more Israelis will now support civil marriage, with that having nothing to do with the way that they self-identify as more traditional, less traditional, more secular, less secular. And a lot of the issues that were once referred to as part of the status quo and part of like a necessary, we must have that in order to have a Jewish state, are pretty much thrown off the window.
Like what?
Like the fact that unless you come to Israel in the next week, then starting next year, you'll have, you're okay?
Your microphone's on
Your
your
mic,
jacket.
yeah.
Adam, can you
You're okay? So starting next year, which I hope will bring you all to Israel, you will have public transportation in Tel Aviv and in Gush Dan, run by city council. Yeah, that's a very good thing.
Yes.
Yeah, we're done with the mic? Great. Good. I will repeat. Thanks. So as I was saying, unless you will be in Israel in the next month, which I guess at least some of you will not, starting 2020, you will have public transportation in Tel Aviv on Shabbat, and not Tel Aviv, really just Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv and Givatayim and Ramat HaSharon, Herzliya, a lot of the Gush Dan municipalities have decided to fund it by themselves. And we understand that more, and I will say, by the way, that as I see it, that is not privatization, okay? A city council level, as I see it, is not a private level. And more and more and more of the things that one were sort of described as the keystone to what it actually means to be Jewish and democratic are just not acceptable by the majority of Israelis anymore. And we're seeing a very strong liberal trend. You don't agree?
No.
Okay. And I think that mainly we need to remember that a lot of the things that were sort of once understood, okay, you can't really civically married in Israel, you can't get civically married in Israel, so what, you'll go to Cyprus and that's not okay. The generation that I'm part of and the younger generations are saying, no, I won't do that. I will marry in Israel, I will marry at home, and the numbers that the Rabbanut is publishing are really...
Not the rabbinate, this is a law from the land.
No, the Rabbanut, okay, so now I will need to correct. The Rabbanut at the beginning of 2019 published numbers. They published a number saying that 6.2% decrease in the number of Israelis marrying, Jewish Israelis marrying in the Rabbanut. Okay, that has been consistent for more than a decade. The numbers, again, I think are undebatable, mainly because I'm not talking about polling. Polling is also very, very positive. But those are actual numbers of people who are just marrying outside of the Rabbanut. And I think that in every aspect that we see in the Israeli public opinion, it is trending much more liberal on religion and state issues.
So it's kind of funny thinking about this. Three Israelis arguing with each other. Is this working now? Yeah. In front of one bunch of very, very engaged American Jews. Just thinking about the situation.
Lots of Israelis. Lots of Israelis.
Israeli American. Okay, whatever. Anyway, I'm usually in the academic framework, but I'm going to be a little bit confrontational because I think that I think what Uri is describing is something that we call in Israel Medinat Tel Aviv.
The state of Tel Aviv.
The state of Tel Aviv, which is the central area, which is predominantly dominated politically, governmentally, and even populationally by people of Ashkenazi sort of secular, etc. And that actually speaks to a gap, an internal gap within Israel, which want to think about in terms of this distinction between American encompass the sovereignty factor. So I want to do something, just a simple sort of exercise in thinking. Who has more in common? And obviously, it's just a question to get us to think. Who has more in common? the Hasidic young man from Bnei Brak and the Hasidic young man from Borough Park, or the Hasidic young man from Bnei Brak and the Russian, not halachically Jewish young man of the age of 18 that he sits on the bench next to at the draft board in Tel HaShomer at the age of 16, 17, because they both...
The Bnei Brak guy.
Excuse me. Okay, so I'll correct you. First of all, we want to talk about rises in Haredi army service, but everybody goes to the draft board. Those who get an exemption still have to sit on the same bench, take the same psycho tests, take whatever they call them, do the same interviews, they go through the entire process, and at the end, those who get an exemption get an exemption. But what I'm trying to describe is a universal experience, it's a universal experience that is particular to Israelis. That a Jew living in another part of the world, unless they volunteer for the Israeli army, does not have any sense of what that means. And that's a type of sovereign experience. It's not about these highfalutin ideas of government and state, religion, etc. It's just kiyum, existence. What does it mean to know that when you're age 16 or 17, you will get that card at home and you will have that chavaya, that experience? So, as a father of 6 children who have all men and women, I have a daughter who's finishing her training and starting to serve in 2 weeks, and my older daughter served, and my sons, etc. The experience that they describe, they communicate to me in terms of what does it mean to be a part of that broad spectrum and population and engage with them through those types of encounters, is one that it's very hard for me to communicate when I teach my American foreign students or when I speak at venues throughout the United States. And I think that is a way, it's an instrument or a portal for thinking about the distinctive natures of these societies. And again, my goal is not to limit it to what's different, but it's when we establish those differences and we acknowledge them, when we think about them, clearly we don't deny them, how can we then go further and say what does allow for navigating a discourse which is positive and not just causes divisions?
I think you've been talking now about socio-political identification rather than Jewish identification, what you've just described. I don't want to make a false distinction.
Okay, that's the point.
Yes.
That in Israel, religion and socio-political identification cannot be pulled apart in the way when you live as a minority in a Christian country or in a pluralistic country that you can, and that's the starting point. Thank you.
And Ruth, you actually spoke to that this morning when you said that in America, we're talking about American Jewry rather than the world diaspora. In America, Jews who wish to be more part of society, and at the time, 140 years ago, could say that their Judaism is a faith rather than their ethnicity or their peoplehood. And could you respond to some of what Adam just said there?
I think the two perspectives...
To speak into your mic.
The two perspectives are different, but they are complementary. And this is part, I think, of the fascination of the Israeli situation. Okay, I got it. I'm going to hold it. Fine. So it's true that in Israel, people of very different attitudes to religion live together, work together, sometimes go to school together, not as much as they did in my generation, where we're really they're more different schooling places to live in, etc. But it's true that there are some shared experiences. You lose friends in terrorist activities, and you lose them whenever, from whatever group in the population you come from. And this is very important. But I think we are asking something that is completely different here, not completely different. And this is, assuming that this is the case, and this is indeed one of the strengths of Israel as a Jewish state, that no one of these groups is not a stakeholder in Israel as a Jewish state. The question is, what should be the norms governing the lives of Israeli Jews? I'm not talking about the Arabs, not because they're not important, but because we are talking about state and religion for Jews, okay? So the question is, assuming that you would like to marry, or your children would like to marry, clearly they're going to choose to marry according to Jewish law, and this is fine, and they can do it here, and they can do it in Israel, and they should be able to do it in Israel. But when my son wants to get married, he's not observant. Why should he be made to only get married by Jewish halachic law? And the answer is, as we just heard, he doesn't have to do it because the Israeli system has vaults of ventilation. We have a legal monopoly of Orthodox Jewish law and Muslim Christian law on marriage and divorce in Israel for all Israelis. But people who resent this find ways of working around it. And the ways around it are ways that are themselves constitutionalized in social norms and in judicial-made norms and in some legal norms. So in fact, it's a symbolic thing that you cannot marry in Israel, for instance, if you want to marry a non-Jew. But for all purposes, two people who want to live together as married couples can do that in Israel, both same-sex and not same-sex, to an extent almost unrecognized in our region, but also in many Western democracies. So life in Israel is much more powerful than the limiting law. Now, yes, in Tel Aviv, we're going to have public transportation on Shabbat. This is great, should have happened a long time ago. But civil marriage is not going to change. It's true that a majority of Jews, including Orthodox Jews, would like to have civil marriage in Israel and don't think that it's incompatible with a Jewish state. But they cannot translate their preference to the political system. I have an organization called Metzilah. It's a center for Jewish, Zionist, liberal, and humanist thought. And we do position papers. And we wrote, a couple of years ago, a position paper on marriage and divorce written by two Orthodox people who argued for civil marriage just the way Gavizon Medan, this covenant that I did with a Jewish settler rabbi, Orthodox rabbi, on state and religion issues in Israel. We recommended there to be civil marriage. We recommended the American system. The state gives license, you go and choose how you want to get married. I don't think it has any chance of politically being enacted in Israel despite the liberal rise and despite the kind of what we are seeing now. What we are seeing now is Bibi, not Bibi. We are not seeing a willingness to give up on a political alliance with the ultra-religious parties. We're not seeing that at all. And if they are part of the government, they use their veto power on that for their own reasons. I think it's a mistake on their part. So we want to distinguish whether what are we going to have, what can we fight for, what does it mean in terms of the Jewishness of Israel. And I suggest that we look less at the laws and more at the reality. And I think that in terms of the reality, not the symbolic reality, which I also find very offensive, but in terms of the real reality of the quality of lives of people who want to not have to live their lives under religious norms that they do not accept, I think that secular, non-observant Jews in Israel are free to do that in Israel in an increasing way. So this is not a real issue. It's, as far as I'm concerned, this is another symbolic issue, and we should decide whether we want to work on the symbolic issues, which are harder to solve, or whether we want to find on the real issues that limit the ability of people to do real things in their life.
I think that not everyone on this panel would agree that the lack of civil marriage in Israel is a symbolic issue. And I wonder if Ori would care to address that.
Yeah,
And is there any, is it written in stone in terms of Israel being a Jewish state, that it must be controlled by the Orthodox rabbinate?
So of course not. I think that if you were a Russian-speaking Israeli, born in a country that would not allow him to marry, but will allow him to get killed in battle, you would have thought that that might be a little less symbolic. I think that if you were an LGBT person, born in a country that will allow him to be killed in action, but not to get married, you will also think that it would be less symbolic. And I think that what we're seeing, and you alluded earlier to the Medinat Tel Aviv. I guess some of you have heard the name Tzohar. It's a group of probably 20 years ago were considered liberal rabbis that started a thing in which they were marrying people next to the Rabbanut, maybe, which we now call Rabbanut with a smile, because they are registered in the Rabbanut, we need to say that. But their latest entrepreneurship is handing out kashrut certificates outside of the Rabbanut. And we need to understand that that's happening because it's not a Tel Aviv state thing. It's happening because the majority of Israelis reject the idea that a small minority, and I think that by that we also need to understand that our dear president, who also gave a blessing to this conference, I think confused a lot of Jews around the world with the Four Tribes speech. The Four Tribes speech is very interesting, I think very inspirational, lacks a lot of demographics, which is also important if we want to discuss politics. And the four tribes he described are sort of a description of the Israeli educational systems. Okay, we have 4 different educational systems. Okay, we have what we call in Hebrew, and I, for lack of a better word, will use secular. It's mamlachti. It's not really state. It's sort of the kingdom, maybe.
The public.
Right.
Secular public.
Secular public, religious public, ultra-Orthodox, semi-public, and Arab. And he sort of, right, mostly public. And he sort of said that will be pretty much 4/4 of the Israeli population in a few years. The demographics aren't going in that direction. And I think that we need to understand, and we are seeing that a lot of those things that are progressing are not because of people who believe that those are just symbolic things. We saw thousands of people marching the streets because it changes legislation that said who has the authority to authorize the grocery store to open on Shabbat. That's a stupid thing, okay? We can accept that. Who holds the authority to say if the grocery store does or doesn't open? And we saw mayors who were nearly overthrown for that. So I do think that by and large, the Israeli public is not taking that as sort of a symbolic idea. I do agree that it's becoming much easier both on a legal and on the fact that how society treats that, to just say, I will not marry in the Rabbanut, and I do not really care what the law says. And we shouldn't accept that as sort of a long-term vision.
I'd like to take a couple of questions, if we could, and then move to closing comments and remarks. So we'll take these 2 first. Yes, ma'am?
So could you speak to the fact that if you do reject religion or your Jewishness in Israel, there is no alternative but Orthodox. So what's happened to the conservative movement, the reform movement, so that people can choose on a spectrum what they'd like to be as Jews?
Let's take your question as well at the same time.
I'm hoping Professor Gapsel can take a few minutes and describe the role that the Supreme Court plays in defining the Jewishness of the state and what its self-imposed
want to take that one first? Only if you want to. You don't have to.
Okay. When you have very, very difficult issues,
Speak in the mic.
when a society has very difficult issues, very often the decision is not only what is the right way to go, what is the right solution here, but also the decision of who decides and how. So on what the right decision is, not only myself as a secular, non-observant person agree with most of what Uri will say, but Gavizon Meidan, which is a covenant between a very Orthodox rabbi and myself, agree that the state of Israel shouldn't do what it presently does, as an idea of what should be the case. But you're referring to a different question, which is very important, and the question is, who decides these issues? And I think, only answer that can be given in a very complex democracy like the one we have is, you do it through either the courts or preferably, and it's very controversial, through the legislature. And this indeed has been the case, and this is why I think that despite everything that Ari said, which is correct, the chances that the Israeli Knesset will legislate civil marriage is, as far as I can see, very slim. So I'm glad that you can, work around this. That's it. So now we go back to the court. I said you can do it either through the Knesset or through the court. And the courts usually have been much more secular leaning than the general population and the Knesset. And this is why there is a tendency on some issues, not all, despite the fact that the court doesn't really want to go there, to drag the court into making decisions on state and religion. So there is the Kotel controversy, the conversion controversy, some gay rights cases, all kinds of cases, some public transportation cases, all kinds of cases that go to the court. Sometimes the court says, non-justiciable, I don't want to do it. Sometimes the courts does something that is acceptable. And at times, the courts uses the rhetoric of rights in a way that is problematic to some parts of Israeli society, and that sometimes creates a legislative backlash. The most important example is still 1970, when the Supreme Court said that they should register as a Jew a child of a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother, and the Knesset, as a response, amended the law of return and said that the definition of a Jew under the law of return is almost halakhic. I don't want to go into that. It's fascinating, but too complex for now, okay? So in Gavizon Meidan, we in fact addressed this question. And what we said was that it's better for the courts and for Israeli society as a whole to decide that these issues should not be litigated in the courts in terms of rights. Is it true that the women of the world has a right to pray in the Kotel as they do, or do we want to treat the Kotel as an Orthodox synagogue so they don't have a right to do it there but can do it elsewhere? These are important cultural questions, but they're not legal questions, and it's not a good idea to have them decided in terms of rights by unelected judges who are suspected to not be reflective sufficiently of the sensitivity to religious life. So I think that it's healthy for the State of Israel. It's not demanded by any theory. It's healthy for the State of Israel to prefer to see these very important debates as debates that shouldn't be decided by courts as not as application of laws, but as, general descriptions of rights. Religious pluralism you have in Israel. You have non-Orthodox streams in Israel. But as my colleague Shlomo Avineri often says, for the majority of non-observant Jews, the synagogue they don't attend is an Orthodox synagogue. So there is a democratic problem with the representation of non-Orthodox streams, which here seem to be part of Jewish religiosity, and in Israel are usually politically coupled with the non-observant. Theologically, it's not very coherent, but in terms of the sociology, it's what happens.
You need your mic.
Elaine. So I felt a lot of pain when you asked that question, and it's something that I experience often with friends who are active, not people who are detached from their Jewish life, but people who are active in Reform, conservative, Reconstructionist, post-denominational community congregations, and it's very painful, very hard. And I can understand why, if that is existential to a person, looking at the state of Israel, the Jewish state, and saying they don't accept certain basic definitions for what I am as a Jew, is extraordinarily difficult. I am not going to whitewash that. That is a reality. Campaign, political change, all sorts of things are possible. But in the current situation, I don't see it changing on a macro, governmental, etc. level. On the level of the ground, there are really interesting things going on. I thought it was really profound that Uri was really representing the pluralist approach here, and as an activist, the example that he gave of change was Zohar.
Because you said that it's a Tel Aviv thing.
Zohar is liberal, open-minded Orthodox, Beit Hillel, there are all these organizations, and he didn't say Gilad Kariv and Reform Movement, etc. And to me, I don't know if that's what you intended, but I read it as, gee, he's saying, that is not going to be the way things are going to move. And that's extraordinarily disenfranchising on an individual level. But returning to the theme that I've tried to express throughout this session, you've got to acknowledge the difference. And as long as we try to make our Jewish existences in our own country the ones that we expectationally want to have in Israel, we're going to lose. We're just going to lose because we're just going to be alienated. We're just going to feel pushed out. We're just going to feel that we don't have a connection. And but if we can move beyond that, and that's a hard thing, but that's where we have to be breaking our heads now. It's too easy just to say the rabbinate is terrible, just to say that non-Orthodox denominations don't have the same acceptance. That's terrible. It's horrible, and I'm not being patronizing. I believe it's horrible. But this is a distinction between these places. If we feel that Israel is an important thing for us beyond those issues, how are we going to make it work for us? That's what we have to be doing here.
So can I follow up on it? So the reason I gave an Orthodox example is because you referred to the Tel Aviv state. And from what we're seeing, with all due respect, everything that happens in the Tel Aviv state that you described happened in the ultra and Orthodox spaces a decade later. So this is what's happening with Tzohar. Tzohar is now doing what Gilad Karib did a decade ago. And it took them a while, and now, after they tried and they bounced their head against the wall, and Rabbi Stav wanted to be the chief rabbi, was kicked off the stairs, so now he performs services outside of the rabbinate. I will tell you the truth, in a decade he will do it in marriage. It will happen. There are Orthodox groups now doing marriages outside of the rabbinate. It takes a while. It probably brings in a much higher price within the Orthodox community to do that, unlike my community. And I want to answer, I totally agree with Professor Gabizon about the places of the courts. I think that that's the wrong place to fight. But I want to say that I totally agree with what you said about looking at Israeli Judaism through the lenses of denominational streams is missing the point. That's something that I think should have a very strong standing in Israel, but I just don't think that that's the way to examine it. I think that there are a lot of progress happening in different non-denominational options existing in Israel, and I think that that will probably bring also a contribution to the acceptance of the streams, which is vital. Not, again, forgive me for saying that here, not to please American Jews, because it's important to people who live in Israel, and also because it's your homeland, and if we want that to be the homeland of Jews, we need to accept everyone who's Jewish in their own way. I just believe that that will happen through things that are more daily on an average Israeli's personal life, and not sort of on a higher level discussion that will probably happen later.
Let's take one more question. There was one. Yes, ma'am.
One of the questions you had under the description was...
We ignored the description, but go ahead.
Okay, but I want to ask the question anyway. About American Jews, the right of American Jews to criticize and talk about Israel. How do you feel about that?
As the editor of a Jewish newspaper, I do it all the time. With love as an Israeli citizen.
Can I say something?
Yes.
I think that you need, that happens. Okay? American Jews play a role in the Israeli public system, political system, call it whatever you want, through very different leverages that people do it. Sometimes they do it after they sort of thought, is it in our place? I think that that's a discussion mostly happening among my liberal friends. And some of them, let's take one example, Sheldon Adelson, puts $1 billion shekels in a newspaper, $1 billion shekels, over a decade, and influences the Israeli society. I think that if American Jews care, and I think that the majority care, and I think that you are a part of what I see as the Jewish homeland, then you need to acknowledge the fact that the game is being played. You can sit in the sidelines and it's fine. But it happens. American activists in different levels are active in the field, some through philanthropy, some through politics, some through civil society, some make aliyah, whatever. And I think that all of those options are viable. And I think that if we want to be the homeland of the Jewish people, then you have skin in the game.
So I just want to say that I totally encourage it on a personal level. I think every Jew throughout the world should be engaged and has every right to express their opinion if they accept the fact that there's a legitimacy to having a Jewish national homeland. If they undermine the very concept of a state of Israel, democratic, etc., but if they don't believe that the basic structure is legitimate, then the criticism isn't productive. It's really destructive. I think there's a book that it came out in Israel in September in the spring. It's going to come out soon in English, but I would strongly recommend people to read, not because I think people will agree with it, but in this particular audience, I think it'll be provocative in a fascinating way. There's a professor of political science at Tel Aviv University, Yossi Shein, who wrote a book. It came out in Hebrew. It's called Hamea Yisraelit HaYisraelizatzia Shel HaYadut. The Israeli century, the Israelization of Judaism. And the reason his argument is interesting is because he does a side pass, an end around the idea of this distancing theory, the idea that Jews in North America are becoming alienated from Israel. And his argument is even the people who are the biggest critics, or many of the people who are the biggest critics, people like Michael Chabon or some of the writings that Jonathan Safran Foer and other people have expressed, they're doing it because Israel is the most central, most provocative, most important factor in what it means to be a Jew in the 21st century. It's not, do I like Israel or don't I like Israel? It's, what is the thing that we get passionate about? What is the thing that we get angry about? What is the thing that really, does it for us. It's not denominations for most of us anymore. It may be religion of another way, but certainly the Israel thing really gets to our kishkas. And thinking about that as a way to actually look at even hypercriticism as being positive engagement, I think it could be very helpful for our current realities.
I want to be respectful of our time and also give Ruth the last word. And if you'd like to leave us with a thought.
Okay, I think this is a good conclusion, because I think that there is a difference between the right to criticize, as far as I'm concerned, unlimited. The right to claim the right to influence is different. And I think there are more interesting limits. I think there is a difference between AIPAC that says, we are for the government of Israel, whatever it says, because we are on the government level, Israel versus the United States. J Street comes in and says, no, we're not just the government of Israel. We sometimes are critical about the government of Israel, but that's still pro-Israel, and we would like to have a right, an institutional, constitutional right to say, I think this is clearly legitimate, important, and fine. The last question is, do American Jews have a right to not only influence, not only criticize institutionally, but also decide? On this, I think that Israeli democracy is all and only Israel's citizens, irrespective of religion, nation, all and only citizens. People who want to be citizens can influence. People who choose, totally legitimate and important for Jewish life, to choose to have their Jewish life elsewhere, can criticize, can be engaged, can hate, can do whatever they want. Maybe this is an interesting issue, but I think that their expectation that they should have a privileged place in deciding the issues is misplaced, because Israel is a Jewish state, but is also a democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our panelists, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Sue.
examining the generational divides between the United States and Israel. My name is Michael Koplow. I'm the Policy Director for the Israel Policy Forum, and I am joined today by three wonderful panelists. All the way here on, I guess, my left, but your right, Badia Unger-Sargon. She is the opinion editor for The Forward. Next to her is Sarah Hayetz-Cohen. She is the chairwoman of My Israel and is also a columnist for Makor Rishon. And next to her, we have Noah Landau, who is a diplomatic correspondent for Haaretz and also a member of Haaretz editorial board. So I think we'll dive right in. And I want to ask all of you, and we can start with Badia and then move down. This panel is premised on the notion that there is indeed a generational divide on Israel. That particularly in the United States, younger American Jews feel differently about Israel than older generations of American Jews. And so I'm wondering from all three of you, do you actually think that's correct? And if you do, what do you think is driving it? And if not, why not?
So first of all, thank you to Z3 for having me. I'm truly humbled to be here speaking to you. Thank you to the Israel Policy Forum for having me. I'm very surprised that they're having me on another generational divide panel because I'm a huge generational divide skeptic. So thank you for knowing that about me and letting me come here and spew my skepticism. I just don't buy this whole generational divide stuff. I think it's like a lot of hysteria. 95% of American Jews, when they're polled, they say that they have a favorable view of Israel, that they're pro-Israel. Only 3% say that they are not pro-Israel. So to me, it's like we're talking about 3% of the population who's not pro-Israel or have a favorable view of Israel. And I can tell you personally, like, they're not all young, there's like a lot of old people who in that, 3% anti-Zionist portion of our community. Now, they are part of our community. They are an important part of our community, but they're 3% of our community. So I just feel extremely skeptical about all the hysteria around that the young people are turning against Israel. Like, it's the job of young people to be wrong about things, right? It's their job to get it wrong, to be extremists, to be little, like, woke Khmer Rouge is what we call them in my household. And it's just sort of like, that's their job. But the polling shows that it just doesn't stick. That there's a level to which American Jews, I think, don't really feel that we have a choice about whether or not to be pro-Israel or to be connected to Israel. So I'm kind of extremely skeptical about all of the hysteria around it, but maybe my co-panelists feel differently.
So I don't like hysteria in any level of my life, but I'm less optimistic. And my professional field is not the American young generation, but more the Israeli young generation. And I think that when you talk about divide, about the growing gap, it has two sides. It has the American or the diaspora Jewish community side, and there's another side, the Israeli side. And I do think that the gap is widening, from both directions. And I'm afraid that the discussion is not being held between two. I just spoke about it in another panel, so sorry for whoever was there. But for two vectors that are going to different directions, when the Israeli public is going more conservative, like center-right, it's a progress. It's not, it's not in Hebrew we say zbeng v'gamarnu. It's not a one-day change, but it is the direction of like demography and the Israeli politics in nowadays. And on the other side, when I try to understand, and I admit that I don't fully understand the processes that are going through the through the Jewish community, Jewish communities in North America or in other places. I'm trying to read. I'm trying to hear different opinions, but I do think that they go more to the liberal side. Now, these are the two vectors that are not in the same direction. I'm afraid they're growing exponentially. And unfortunately, I don't see a lot of patience in, in the Israeli side. I don't see a lot of patience for political disagreements. So people are very short with their hand on the divorce. Okay, we don't agree upon, I don't know, the future of Judea and Samaria. Okay, so go to hell. I mean, people are I don't see a lot of patience within my home base, basically. And I also don't feel any understanding of my political view on the American side. So I said on the other panel, this is what I'm here for. But I'm not that optimistic like that yet.
So, hi everyone. Anyone here reads Haaretz, by the way? Just so I have, oh, wonderful, okay. The funny thing about numbers, right, is that they say what you want them to say. So it was, as I was looking for data on this issue, because I'm not the expert of the question about generational gap within American Jews, so I was looking for data, and I saw that basically you can find anything that you want on this issue. You can claim that there is a generational gap, you can claim that there isn't, all the numbers exist. But I do think that maybe on a more psychological level, if we just take the numbers aside for a second, it is more difficult, I think, for younger Jews in America to talk about Israel than it was maybe for their parents. I'm not talking about the grandparents, that's a different issue. But if we think about what Israel was when it was established for the parents' generation, and when all of their friends went to the kibbutz to pick oranges, and it was the right liberal thing to do, and how it looks now for many of the younger people when they speak to their friends about Israel. So besides the numbers, I think it's also, there are new challenges for younger people in America to be engaged with Israel, which of course is not new to all of you who come to these conferences and hear those panels many times. But if you want to speak about the gap between young American Jews and young Israelis, or generational gap, if we look at both countries, which, is it your next question?
You can
yeah?
take it now. Go ahead.
Because if it's a question, I'll save it. But that I do have a lot to say about. So first of all, since it's a Jewish conference, so we'll start, of course, with the Holocaust. It was Professor Yehuda Elkanah who said once that from Auschwitz we had two kinds of people emerge. You had those who said, this will never happen again, and those who said, this will never happen to us again. Metaphorically speaking, I think that many from the first group, the universal message, came to America on some level. Many who took the particular message are now more representing the thoughts in Israel about this issue. And when you think about young American Jews, how they were raised in America, which is multicultural and has shared traumas, different ones than Israel, like slavery, for example. And a young Israeli who is not in a multicultural environment, but in a melting pot, and is the majority when American Jews are a minority. Then you see that this is really a different environment to grow in and to think about Israel in. So young Israelis, I agree totally with Sarah, are more conservative. They're shifting to the right. Well, I think young Americans are more on the left than their parents, probably. I don't know if it's because, the younger people are always more revolutionary. I'm not sure. I mean, we'll only know when this generation grows, right? We'll know later if they really went to the left or it's just a trend that will change. But we see that because young American Jews are in this different multicultural, more liberal environment, and if you look at the data, I mean, this is totally obvious, right? I looked at some of these numbers, and I saw that, for example, in Israel, only 8% define themselves as leftists, 8%. And if you look at America, how many Jews describe themselves as leftists, it's almost 50%. So this is clear that this is a totally different environment. And also, they don't understand each other. So if you look at, this one I think was interesting. Anyone here knows what most American Jews thought was the most problematic for Israelis? What most Israelis thought was their biggest problem? So definitely not the occupation. Most of them said, most Israelis said that it was the economy, way before security, which is what most American Jews thought. But how many do you think of American Jews actually answered the economy as the number one problem for Israelis? 1%. So this is how much we don't understand each other. It's quite overwhelming. And I also have a solution, but that must be your next question.
So let's go. Well, let's leave solutions for a couple of minutes. So Noah talked about a lot of different structural issues. Sarah, it sounds like you focus more on the political issues, right? That Israelis are moving politically right and American Jews are moving politically left. In your view, is this something? I guess, do you think this is a recent phenomenon, or is this just the culmination of 7 decades of the two sides moving apart? And do you see any prospect for the two sides moving together politically in the future, or do you think they're just destined to keep on going off in different directions?
I don't think we need to think the same. Sorry, I have a mic. The guy from the technical part asked me to be special. I don't know. It's not a recent phenomenon. I think it's years that it's a process. I mean, society doesn't turn to the more conservative side at a glance, right? It takes time. It takes, demography, it takes processes. The Israeli public is very well experienced, is very smart, even though Europeans usually refer us as natives that don't understand what's good for them. But Israelis are very smart, very well experienced. We experienced the Oslo years. We experienced 2 intifadas. We experienced the disengagement. We actually live these dilemmas every day. And the Israeli younger generation is going, as I see it, more to the conservative side. As Noah just spoke about it, so I don't want to repeat it. But I don't think that in order to build bridges, you need to agree and to think the same. I have a lot of, I just had a group when I was in maternity leave 9 months ago. I met a group voluntarily with my baby of Americans, non-Jewish leaders, more on the progressive side. And one of their questions was, do you have friends on the left side of the political map? And I said, what do you mean, do I have friends? Of course I have friends. Like, my best friend is voting for Meretz, which is far away from me. So we don't talk about politics. And after the panel, one came to me and told me, you know what? That's amazing how natural you said it, because in America, I don't even know people who think different than me. So I don't know about them. I know about us that it's possible, and this is why I'm here for it. And I think it's not only possible, we have to do it. I mean, we have to build these bridges, because this is like, I wrote myself that my self, where I come from, is a very basic thing of arvut adadit, the mutual responsibility. It's a very fundamental Jewish matter. It's written in Sefer Bereshit, et achai anochi mevakesh.
So this is the basic of the Jewish people. We cannot give up upon each other, even if we disagree. Now, the second point is there are gaps and disagreements, and we need to give these gaps and these issues, we need to give them a place of honor, and we need to discuss, and we don't need to play the blame game that I feel that usually is being played between Israel and diaspora. So you're responsible for the gap. I'll tell you a short story. So we put up a post in our Facebook page. We have around 170,000 followers on our Facebook page of Israel Shalima Israel. We put up a post that on the day of 1 year for Pittsburgh terror attack. And we said, we did this very nice graphic, and we said, we stand with you, you're our brothers and sisters, and we remember. And we got a message, a private message to our Facebook page from a very intelligent guy. Like, he was not like barbaric, he didn't curse, he said, why should we be care about the Jews in America when they are only like going to the left, only go to J Street, only go to NAF, blah, blah, blah. And like he didn't write it as a comment. He wrote it he really wanted an answer, not just to punch. And this is what I want to change. That we have something in common. We're all Jews, we're the same people. And even if we disagree, we have to talk with each other.
So, Badia, as a divide skeptic, we're sitting here at a conference that in many ways is dedicated to this notion that there is a divide, and I think that...
Because it will not surprise you to learn that I think that the discourse around the divide between Israel and the diaspora is also hysteria. So
talk about that, but before you talk about that, I'm curious if you have any thoughts as to why so many people think there is a divide. If when you look at, like as you said, if 95% of American Jews describe themselves as pro-Israel, why do you think this divide rhetoric is so in the air?
Sorry, but what is to be pro-Israel? I mean, isn't that
that's another good question too. So.
These are the problems of the luckiest Jews in history, in world history. We are the luckiest Jews of world history with very little to worry about. So we worry about this. It will not surprise you to learn that 200 years ago, Jews who disagreed with each other actually killed each other, Like, maybe it will surprise you to learn that, but we are living in such a blessed time that these kinds of debates that are completely normal and natural in a demos, in a nation, which is what we are, that we sort of get up in arms over this stuff. I would hazard to you there is more that divides Trump-voting Jews in America from non-Trump voting Jews in America than there are that divide American Jews from Israeli Jews, right? Just think about how much you hate those Jews, the chutzpah, right? So when we think about this stuff, I just don't see like these major divides. I think the reason that we think that this is a huge divide is because of our privilege and our power and our luck, which I'm so grateful for. I mean, my grandfather survived the Holocaust, is still alive, so I don't take any of that for granted. What I do think is that at the end of the day, the American Jewish community, I have bad news for you, which is that the older Jews are also moving to the left. That's what the polling shows. And why are they moving to the left, right? Why are we living in a time where even older Jews are becoming extremely left-wing? Because of our president, right? Like, what do you mean by even? I'm sorry. This is the divide. What about the divide? They've always been on the left. However, more Jews now define themselves as left than ever before, and that has been a radical shift in the last 3 years. And this gets back to a very important point, which is that when people who are not Palestinian and not Israeli talk about Israel, they are not talking about Israel. They are talking about themselves. Right?
Wait, but just to clarify, so when you say that older Jews are moving to the left, you mean with regard to Israel, or do you mean politically in general?
Politically in general. So that's another reason why I'm like so skeptical about this divide talk. Like, you're all moving to the left, right? We're all like collectively in response to the president shifting our politics. And what that means is that in 5 years, when there's a Democrat in office, right, we will shift back to the center, right? Sorry, that's how I see things, but we will shift back to the center. And it's another reason why I don't believe in the divide is because like older Jews, you've never seen them so willing to criticize Israel. And the reason they're doing that is they're talking about themselves. They're talking about how they feel about Trump, who's so close with Bibi, who's made Israel his pet project, which was really mortifying to most of us, right? He took the thing that we feel really close to and made it his project. You know, his stain kind of suddenly was like, I mean, it was suddenly we started to see Israel through the Trump lens, the way we see everything. And so all of this sort of shift to the left that's happening is much more, I think, a reflection of how we view our own political moment than it is how we view other Jews, who we will never not feel attached to and part of a nation with.
No, I'm curious on that point. There have now been 2 American presidents in a row who have, in some ways, been controversial when it comes to Israel. President Obama, who was not liked by most Israelis, and President Trump, who is very well liked by most Israelis. And I'm curious if you detect something different during the last 2 presidencies in terms of how Israelis perceive American Jews, and if they perceive American Jewish support being driven by presidents, or whether there's something deeper at work here, right? If Badia's thesis about any divide that may or may not exist being a function simply of just who's in the Oval Office, if you're feeling that on the Israeli side of the ocean as well.
So first of all, I didn't see any polls on which president the Israelis like the most. You know, sometimes we just say these things because, yeah.
I mean, I've seen lots of polls, and
yeah.
Yes.
But in any case, when I just came into this room, I heard a conversation when I was waiting, and someone said, someone was asking someone, why do Israelis like Trump so much? Why do they support him so much? And she was but the point is not, I think, the answer. I mean, from my point of view, the point is that she was really, I mean, I heard the frustration in that question. The question wasn't necessarily about the answer, but it was an expression of the frustration. Why is Israel so much pro-Trump? So I think, I mean, I don't know, how do we define the divide? It's for sure, it's divisive. I mean, there's something there when people are asking, why is Israel supporting this president that we so much don't like? I don't know if this is something that, will indeed just go away if there'll be a different president, or it shows that there is something fundamental here that we're debating. And we didn't say anything about religious pluralism, for example, which it's a real issue. It's not just about a question, philosophical question about younger and older generations. This is a real issue. Are Reform and conservative rabbis recognized in Israel or not? Can you teach it in schools? Can I sit next to my partner in a regular shul in Israel, or what? All these questions that are that they do exist, and we do differ on these issues. So I mean, I might be a little skeptical about panels about the generational gap, especially because I don't see a lot of younger people attending these events. Sorry. So this is also a question. Do we need to do all these panels about younger people not being engaged, and then they never come because this is not the sort of thing that younger people want to do? But I do think it's a real issue. And there are major differences. And regarding the president, look, I'll tell you a secret. Israel and the Israeli establishment and the Israeli government, and one dude sitting, on top of that government, Bibi Netanyahu, refusing to let go, they're not all that excited about all of Trump's policies. There's a lot of double speech around these issues. You can see that, for example, President Trump decides to cut the aid to Palestinian security forces, and then Israel sent people, to whisper on his people's ears that actually we don't really want you to do that. That's a little bit risky for us because, they do maintain stability and security, and it's important to fund them. And then, according to recent reports, Trump said, well, Bibi should fund it if it's important to him. He should pay for it. And it's not only that issue. It was the same with other issues. So, it's true that it looks like the Israeli government supports everything that Trump does. With a guy like Trump, you probably should, right? I don't know if you saw that they built this whole new ghost town, and they called it Trump Heights, and they made all this gold. They know how to treat him, but I'm sure they have some kind of a psychological report. But it doesn't mean they actually agree with all of his policies, and some of them, even the Israeli government thinks that they're risky. So it's a little bit more complex, I think, than total support.
I just want to respond to it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Something Noah said. I don't mean to suggest that we don't have differences with our Israeli brothers and sisters. As an American Jew, I obviously think the occupation is a deeply, deeply urgent issue, and it bothers me at a very personal and very Jewish level. And I also think that the religious pluralism bothers me very much, that I have less religious freedom as a conservative Jew in the Jewish state than I do in America. I think those are really problematic issues, but there's a certain level of dissent that a democracy, as Spencer pointed out, that a democracy has to be able to sustain, that a nation has to be able to sustain within it. And I just don't think that we have reached the level of breaking or anything even close to the kinds of dissent that the nation of the Jews has sustained in its past and its history. We're so much closer than we've ever been, despite these huge differences and these huge, issues. You think about America, we're engaged in a perfectly, I'm gonna get clobbered for this, but we have major issues here, like abortion and gun control, where we really, really, really disagree with our, fellow, Americans, but that doesn't mean that we're not one nation or that we're not in America. A democracy has to be, the whole point of it is that it can sustain a certain amount of dissent. But I agree with you that there are obviously big differences between our communities.
Sarah, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about obligations that either side owes to the other. Are there obligations that American Jews owe to their Israeli counterparts? Are there obligations that Israeli Jews owe to their American counterparts?
So let me read, because I put a lot of thought on these panels. Really, I'm also on jet lag, so all night I'm okay, what am I going to say? But I do want to say that the whole world is becoming more global village, but there is a fraction between Jewish diaspora and these Jewish Israelis, and so locality still matters. And now it doesn't mean that there is no value to the Jewish communities in diaspora, but there is one very central focus here, which is the most dramatic historical chapter written in the history of the Jewish people, and it's happening in Israel. So I said it on the last panel, we just read the last parasha is Lech Lecha, and for 2,000 years, the Jewish tradition aimed to Eretz Israel to build a nation, to build a country, to build a state, and it's happening in front of our eyes. I mean, it's happening in front of your eyes. It's happening in my life, and that's the most dramatic. It's not about prophecy. It's not about wishes. It's not about prayers. It actually happens. So that's the most dramatic thing happens in our generation, and we're so lucky to have it. I mean, I totally agree with you that it's a privileged discourse that we're having now, because look what we're talking about: relationship between two big thriving communities. We're so lucky to have this conversation. So that's about proportion, we need to look how lucky we are. But I do think that the most important thing happens today is this dramatic thing of a sovereign state in Israel. Now, it's the only democracy in the Middle East. You can say it's not perfect, whatever. The U.S. is not perfect as well, as you just said. I don't know any democracy that is perfect. We can always improve our democracy, but it's the only democracy in the Middle East. And look on our surrounding. I mean, we actually live in a jungle. And we succeed to build a thriving economy, a flourishing democracy, and that's a success story. And the Jewish communities around the world, and especially in the US, has a very important part of it. And we should build this connection. And even if you're optimistic about the gap, I mean, that's something you always have to facilitate, the connection between the two very different communities.
Noah, you would, in the beginning, you said you had answers to the problem, how we can bridge this divide. So.
Yes, and in America they always say in a minute or less, give us the solution.
You can take more than a minute if you like.
So this is usually where I say the most basic responsibility that we have for each other as a Jewish nation is at least as thoughtful people to be informed, right? So this is like the perfect pitch where I say, and read Haaretz because you can be informed. But I just thought about it so this is what I usually say, but I thought about it when I was here at the conference today, that there's another issue, which is the issue that people talk a lot about now, which is the shrinking tent. So because the conversation is polarized, another trending word, what happens is that in spaces like this one, this conference today, there's a tendency to avoid any controversy. There's a tendency to say, okay, because everything is so polarized and everything is so difficult, let's shrink the tent. Let's bring in the people that are most, that will not annoy anyone specifically, and not our donors. This is something I see not only here, and I'm not, this is a great conference, and 1,000 people came, which is amazing. But still, I see that in many conferences on the issue. Let's just try not to annoy anyone too much and bring in all the people that say nice thing, and all the panels are, very civilized. No one argues with anyone so much. And this is so Jewish to argue. This is if there's anything that is really like Jewish tradition is to really argue with each other, right? This is how, this is the Talmud. This is everything that we did for many generations. So I think there is a responsibility not to be so much afraid of arguing with each other and inviting those people that, not only the divide skepticals, as much as it's, there are people who are skeptical of bigger things, and we shouldn't be afraid of bringing them in to speak at conferences like this one.
So I totally agree. As the opinion editor of the most diverse opinion section, I believe, in the nation, I completely agree with you. I would say I want to suggest a different kind of connection that our communities have. Hannah Arendt said at one point that you can be safe as a minority in a country as long as your people are the majority in some other country. That's really the thing that protects you as a minority. If you don't have that, you have essentially what the African American community has here, where there's no sort of external person responsible or entity responsible for their well-being. And I would like to suggest that in 1967, that's essentially what we got. Not quite in 1948, because Israel wasn't sure that it would survive. But after 1967, it became extremely clear that there was a very powerful other country where we were the majority that was going to come and make problems for Americans if they didn't protect us and protect our rights. And Israel's strength, its very human nature, it changed the way Americans viewed American Jews. We before were kind of like a tolerated / kind of not really respected minority, and after 1967, we truly started to become what we are now, which is a deeply, deeply beloved, protected minority. And in that sense, I think what Israel truly gave us was American citizenship. But beyond that, American Jews are the promise of a liberal democracy fulfilled. our role on this planet. We prove that democracy can protect minorities. And I think we are the best example of that, and maybe even like the only true example of that, of a minority who can feel so safe. Of course, now we're having this rise of anti-Semitism, and it's terrible, but look at how our elected officials are responding to that with horror, right? We are very cherished here. And as such, we are this promise of liberal democracy fulfilled. And I think that that is the thing that I wish Israelis would learn when they look at us, that they would learn how important a liberal democracy is, how important the protection of minorities are, because we truly are like a living monument to the most important institution in the world. Maybe religion would be this, second competing. So while we of course need to have more compassion for things like the Second Intifada and the deep psychological wounds that Israelis live with and the real threats, I think that the image of the American Jewish community is that promise of a liberal democracy fulfilled, and it's something that I think Israel could stand to think a little bit more about.
Sorry, did you want to respond?
I'm going to repeat what I said on the other panel because I think it's very important. I want to explain why I'm here. So I'm a mother of 4 beautiful kids, and I hate going away from them. My youngest is 9 months. כל הכבוד לי. I'm a very brave woman. No, and I have a great husband. And I hate going away from them. I refuse every offer to go abroad, and I did it because Amitai, the one who organized this conference, he told me, listen, we need people from the right wing side. I have tons of lefties. I need people from the right, and I want you to come. So, So I didn't come because he requested so nicely. I came because I think it's important, and I came because I think that the more liberal community in the States don't hear our voice, and vice versa. I don't think you really genuinely hear our voice. Like I grew up as a non-religious girl in a kind of religious settlement. It's called Kiryat Arba, next to Hebron. My grandfather was one of the founders. Don't swallow your tongue. Okay. My grandfather was one of the founders of Kiryat Arba, and I'm proudly, waving this flag. And I'm a great supporter of this settlement or across the Green Line project, if you want to call it like this. And usually when groups from abroad come to Israel, from especially the U.S. and Canada, they bring me as a token, as a leaf. We need someone from the right. You're a woman. You speak nicely. You have a nice smile, and you on the right side. So okay, let's bring and make a tick. And then they see me as an alien. Okay, I spoke with a few groups. One of them a day before I came here, and they see me as an extremist alien that supports sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, and they don't understand my views. Now, I'm not a minority in Israel at all. The direction is growing. Like there was a poll last elections. I think it was the second elections. The Israeli Democracy Institute made it. It's not a right-wing institute, okay? It's on the left. And they asked various questions. One of them was on the conflict. And they asked, do you support Israeli sovereignty, Israel implement sovereignty over the Area C? Area C is 60% of Judea and Samaria. That's a lot, okay? And 48% of the people who were asked said they support. That's a lot of people. You wouldn't see it a decade ago. Now that's the direction that the Israeli public is going to. Now I'm not just a reporter. I'm pushing for this direction out of a very complex point of view, very responsible point of view. I wrote a whole research about it. We made a whole conference last year. We held a very popular conference last year in Jerusalem. Now, this is the direction I'm pushing to.
Could I ask, like, do you want, like, the Palestinians living there to have civil rights under that Israeli sovereignty?
Wherever, well, it's a very complex issue, so we can talk about it
Actually,
the whole
it's yes
day.
or no.
But no, it's actually not yes or no. But wherever Israel implement the sovereignty, yes. So we should offer citizenship to the Palestinians. Area C, there are approximately 150,000 Palestinians, plus minus, nobody really counted. But yes, the answer is yes. Now, am I looking for the easy solution? The answer is no. But I'm looking for a very complex solution. I don't like the word solution. You know, solutions you have in math. In geopolitical issues, it's more complex, especially in the Middle East. So, and the reason I'm here is because I stand on the right, and I'm not, I'm trying to be reasoned. I'm trying to be unapologetic because these are my beliefs. And I feel that there is a very big lack of conversation between us. So this is why I made this 14 hours flight and left my kids at home, and I, miss them every minute. But this is why, because I think we don't talk with each other. You don't talk with me, you talk about me, not about Sarah, okay? About the
You don't talk to your friend for minutes. Your best friend for minutes.
Oh, we do. Oh, believe me, I talk with lefties all the time.
You just said before that.
Hang on, hang on.
Yeah, because we're getting into a fight. But whatever, we are. I'm talking to people who don't agree with me all the time. They're talking to me all the time. But every in a couple, you need to know your advantages and your disadvantages. So with my bestie, we put that aside. So I feel there's a lack of discussion, and this is why I'm here. Okay, when you talk about the tent.
Okay, so questions we have about 10 minutes for questions. Please make your question brief, and more importantly, please make sure your question has a question mark at the end of it. Right over here.
So I want to ask the question of Dr. Batia because I was shocked by your statement. I have the feeling that you're out of touch with reality. If you've been at UC Berkeley, if you've been at UCSA, if you've seen how many young people are against Israel, I don't know how you can say, we don't have an issue.
Well, we asked them, they're right there.
Not only am I aware of it, but I was protested about a month ago while trying to talk about anti-Semitism by Students for Justice in Palestine. So that I'm very aware of it. But to me, that's, first of all, that happens at a tiny portion of the elite of the elite of the elite. There is no chapter, there's no BDS support at community colleges, at state colleges, at 95%, yes it is, at 95% of institutes for higher institutions, this is just not happening. But of course, as a member of the press, I can tell you, when this kind of thing happens, as it happened to me, it gets a lot of attention because it's shocking, and that's how news works. But at 95% of institutions of higher learning, there is no BDS, there's no pro-Israel activity, it's just not there. This is happening only at a very small percentage of elite institutions.
Sorry, no, yeah, over here.
I would like to cede my time to the kids that came here from Berkeley to talk about their experience.
Yes.
Would anybody care to talk about what it's like dealing with anti-Semitism? Have you seen your friends been turned away from their own identities? That's a different issue.
Except that's not. This is an important discussion, but it's not. That's not what this is. So.
Bacha, are you an expert on the identity of the young people on whose behalf you come to speak on in such Pollyanna and glowing terms? They're right here. I don't understand why no one is asking them what their experience is like and why you think you're the author of their experience.
Once again, I'm not sure that's a. I'm not sure that's a question. A question for this. There was a hand in the back, please. Yeah.
They want to ask a question, though. One of them, at least.
If they have a question, I don't.
If it's a question related to something that was set up here, sure, but
Yeah, I would also just like to ask about like the presence of If Not Now on campus and also Jewish Voice for Peace, because I agree that BDS isn't as much of a problem anymore on campus. But I think two of the major problems we're seeing on campus now are institutionalized anti-Semitism with the professors, but also like rising not anti-Semitism, but the growth of these groups such as If Not Now and JVP. And I also just wanted to ask, because I've actually read your article, Young Jews Are Actually Winning the Generational War Over Israel, where I think you actually were touching on this, and I just wanted to hear, if you could elaborate on that article, that would be great, because it seems to be a little bit different than what we're hearing right now.
Yeah, okay, first of all, I super respect that you guys are here, and I super respect what you're going through on your campus. I got my PhD at Berkeley, so I know what Berkeley is like. It is in that tiny percent, and you're doing God's work, and don't let anybody tell you that there's anything wrong with your identity. It's amazing to me. I truly, truly feel for what you're going through, and I think it's really hard, and you're on the front lines, and I super respect what you're doing and where you're coming from and what your life is like. And I feel pain about it, because this art experience was extremely shocking for me, just because I had never personally experienced it firsthand, being protested myself. So I really feel for what that is like on that percent, at these elite institutions where the future leaders of our community are forging their paths. So let's just have a round of applause for the extremity of what you are experiencing does not translate into the numbers of what is happening quantitatively. The If Not Now is a tiny organization. It has a huge impact. Just like the bunch of, just like on Twitter, if you get all your information about American Jewish life from Twitter, you will think that 80% of our community is anti-Zionist. Because what happens is you have these anti-Zionist voices, and they get elevated by non-Jews who want this to be the case, right? Who want the Jewish fig leaf. And so they get elevated and escalated and promoted, and it looks much greater because qualitatively it is so extreme. I know it doesn't help you to hear that you are in a minority going through a very difficult thing. But that's my analysis of the numbers and my analysis and my experience from going to colleges and talking to people who speak at colleges all the time. But I still super, super have respect for you and what you're going through.
Can I just ask a brief follow-up?
Sure.
So I understand that this might still be a minority of the Jewish population, but it's hard to ignore the fact that these groups, If Not Now and JVP, did not really exist in the same numbers as they are right now, and they didn't have the same presence before as they do now. So there is some sort of growth.
Do you know how many people are in JVP? And a lot of them are actually non-Jews who live in Europe, right? Do you know how many people it is?
I don't know. All I know about is their presence on Berkeley's campus.
It's 15,000. There's 15,000 members of JVP. So again, to you, I have so much compassion for what that must be like, to feel like your very identity is the subject of somebody else's contempt and these horrible protests. But there's 15,000 members of JVP, right? So we have to just keep the numbers. If I was talking to you guys at Berkeley, I would not have been talking about this, because obviously your experience is what we would have been talking about, and how to mediate that, and how to be a proud Jew, and how to cleave to your identity in a way that doesn't make you feel like you have to give something up. That's what we would have talked about.
Yeah, I see that. Sorry, this is going to be my last, and then I'll let someone else go. But these groups, they're having an increased presence in national politics as well. We see them on Bernie Sanders' campaign, and this is getting national attention.
Yeah. So what I would say to that is, again, to me, that is Trumpism. That is just how you see the Democratic Party, the far left version of it, the progressive wing, really shaping itself to meet the Trump in so many ways you see this, just like letting him set the agenda and answering in exactly the same tone. And of course they're not the same because he has all this power and they do not. But these voices are getting elevated because of our national politics. And again, like, what does that influence actually translate into? It remains to be seen. But I think your influence is going to be the thing we're going to be looking at in 5 years.
Other questions? I'm sorry?
Did I not get mine back?
Didn't you give it to them? Yes, over here. No, I'm sorry. The right over here.
I've heard the comment about this increased conservative perspective, the right perspective that we don't hear very frequently. I was wondering if you could spend just a few minutes so that we could hear, why should we be proud or feel good about the settlements? You clearly do, and I would like to understand that perspective. I haven't heard a good argument for it, and it would be really helpful to understand why you feel that way.
Why I feel what? Proud?
Well, why? So we have problems
In a minute or less.
In a minute or less. And so I'm not saying you should feel any differently than you. I'm saying I'd like to understand that perspective because I don't hear it. I don't hear it here, and it would be helpful to understand what that looks like. What is the great question?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Why?
The question was why. Could she explain why she's proud of the settlements?
So, what's your name? Barbara. I'm going to thank you for your question. I'm afraid I'll disappoint you if I'll explain it in a minute or less. I think that in a minute, okay, just in a minute, if I won't destroy my whole thesis if I do it in a minute, but I was born in Kiryat Arba. When my grandfather founded Kiryat Arba, he did it out of a Zionistic motivation. He said, once we came back to Hebron after the 6 Days Wars, we have to renew the Jewish community that was cut in 1929 in the pogrom of Tarpat. There was a stable, tiny but stable Jewish community in Hebron until 1929. And when he did it, when he came back, so in 48 we weren't lucky to get back to Hebron, but in 67 we did. So now when we're physically back to Hebron, we have to rebuild the Jewish community out of pure Zionism. Now we can discuss hours on this, but I do want you to understand that even if we disagree, and we can elaborate on this, his motivation, and my motivation as well, was pure Zionism, out of the belief that Hebron is, why not Uganda? I mean, this is why we came to Israel, to our ancestors' land. This is the Bible. This is why we're here. Now, it doesn't mean we have no challenges. We have tons of challenges. Okay, there's a big Palestinian population. Once again, we don't have enough time, but I do want you to understand, I hope you'll understand, that his motivation and my brother's motivation is pure Zionism. That's why he's here for that. He's 94 now, thanks God. And he's continuing with, he lives there. My parents live there. Every time I go to my parents, I need to go, to change cars to plastic windows in order not to get to put myself and my kids in a risk because of the stones being thrown on the road. Now, we didn't look for good life. We didn't look for convenient life, like the Chalutzim, like the pioneers in the early 90s. We're not there for conveniency. My grandfather left a brand new house in Holon, in the city of Holon, and moved with his kids with his wife and kids to a small apartment in Kiryat Arba. He didn't look for convenient life. He looked for life of fulfillment, of fulfillment of his ideologic out of pure Zionism. So that's in a glimpse, okay? I don't have enough time, and there are tons of challenges. We can discuss. I'm thinking about it every day. Right? You know, everyone has a hobby. Mine is the conflict. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, although I'm willing to bet that speakers will be happy to answer questions if you come up afterwards. So please, a round of applause for our wonderful panel.